Trauma bonds, what they are, and what we need to do in order to have healing and recovery. That is next.
Dr. Gregory Jantz is a best-selling author of over 45 books and the founder of the Center A Place of Hope, voted a top 10 center for depression treatment in the U.S. As the pioneer of whole person care, Dr. Jantz is known as the messenger of hope. Now the nation's expert on anxiety, depression, substance abuse, relationships, trauma, and PTSD, here is Dr. Gregory Jantz.
Hi, I'm Counselor Dr. Greg Jantz, founder here at the Center, A Place of Hope. Trauma bonds. It can bring up images. The word trauma could even be what we call a triggering word where you feel suddenly unsettled. This is part 2 of our conversation on trauma and trauma bonds. And I just want to share, here's some of the things. I've got a great list here. We're going to move through this quickly because I like to get right to the information. And trauma comes in many different forms, by the way. It could be an event that was severely traumatic. It could have been an automobile accident. It could have been abuse in any form, sexual, physical. It could be something that has recurred over and over in an abusive relationship. And so as we look at this, we go, trauma has many different flavors, and it affects all of us in some fashion. And sometimes the trauma has surprise impact on our current relationships, future relationships, as well as the degree of depression and anxiety that can reside in our life, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. Here's some things to be aware of as far as symptoms that you could be experiencing if you've had trauma. It's good to know, okay, here's what could be happening, and now we're also going to talk about what do we need to do about these symptoms. You may find yourself isolating from support systems. Relationships that were once trusting and meaningful and relationships that had value to you, all of a sudden, those relationships are maybe fearful, or you find yourself pulling back from any kind of an intimate, close relationship. Just friends, family, others that you find yourself isolating more and more. So a relationship where there's been abuse, or if you're currently in one, isolation is, and many times an abuser wants to move you over here to isolation as a part of the power and control. If you have a pattern in your life, this is number 2 of, I wrote down repeated breakups or reconciliations. A relationship cycle that is such repeatedly intense relationships. I'm in intensely. I have no respect for personal boundaries. I don't even let the relationship really develop. And it's intense, like suddenly, and it's over with, or then I reconcile. But it's a relationship pattern that's reflective of trauma, or potentially when there's been abuse in your life. All right, number 3, feelings of guilt and shame. If I've had trauma in my life of any form, I could be carrying this residue of really guilt, a residue of shame, a residue that something says I'm not okay. There's something severely wrong with me. As we look at this, we know that it's a lie, and abuse and trauma does cause us to feel like in some way we are defective. In some way there's something terribly wrong with me. All right, we're breaking this all down and really talking about the symptoms, and we're making it kind of easy, right? I'm purposely not using a lot of psychological jargon, and I'm just getting to here's some things you could be experiencing in a very real way. The next one is you may find difficulty in setting boundaries. It's like, boundaries, what's a boundary? What's a healthy boundary in a relationship? Well, you allow yourself probably to be controlled. You may feel powerless. You may not share your true feelings or your opinion, and you just have no sense of boundaries. You may find yourself in a codependent relationship where you're still over-serving, allowing yourself to be abused. And really, we go back and it reflects back on those original traumas. All right, the next one is related. It's number 5, but it's rationalizing or minimizing abuse. You may even say, well, that's just the way they are. That's just the way he is or she is. And you minimize how you've been treated, or you minimize the severity of the abuse or the severity of the trauma in your life. And grief can be a form of trauma. You've had significant losses in your life of maybe loved ones, losses of financially that had great implications. So this is, and after a pattern of this, a person may tend to minimize. And so that's why we're talking about this today, the minimization of abuse, the minimization of that trauma, which means I'm trying not to give it much attention, and it was no big deal. Come on, people have worse things in your life. So that's part of it. Now, you may be in a relationship as well that's you're finding hard to leave. Well, I know this is not a healthy relationship, and I know I'm allowing myself to be used in so many different ways. I don't have boundaries. I don't have a sense of self-respect, but you don't know a way out. And it seems like, I better just settle for this. And again, keeping yourself entrapped in layer upon layer upon layer of trauma. That's what happens. We end up feeling powerless in a relationship. There's a lie that says this is what I deserve, and that's what I allow to happen. So these are just a few of the notations of some of the symptoms. This is carry over a little bit from part 1, but I want to talk about in a relationship, if you've had trauma, it is going to affect that relationship in some way. In some way, that relationship, it's like a toxicity that comes in, and it's permeating everything about who you are, what you see about yourself, what you don't see about yourself. It's a poison that clouds how you look at the world. And so trauma will unresolved, the key word there, unresolved trauma will affect us in a very significant way. Why are trauma bonds difficult to break? Because there's been a very deep bonding that can happen through trauma. We can and do bond and identify at times with the abuser, and we've minimized it. Now we're connected. We feel like we can't get out of this no matter what. And so I just call that the emotional investment, not a healthy investment, but and maybe I've been in this relationship for a long time and I don't see a way out. Now, the next one is why it's difficult is there could be some positive memories. Historically in the relationship that could be very traumatic, there may be some real positive memories, points that were positive, and you cling to those positive memories. There could be some highlights that go, wow, no, it used to be good, and you cling to those. But the highlights are also reflective. Usually it's a very deep valley of trauma. So that's a part of that up and down pattern over and over. We also want to look at the whole area of the abuser. If you're in a relationship that's trauma-based, the abuser may show at times some real hope for change. You may see, wow, they have been really nice to me this week. It's been really good. And then you realize, no, that's a pattern. And it goes from good to bad to bad to bad. And so we want to be aware that there are patterns. At times we need to be working with somebody in a counseling type relationship or with the team, and the work that we do here at the center where you're able to have somebody kind of walk you through your lifespan so far and help you pinpoint patterns in the relationships, patterns that you've continued that are unhealthy. Maybe it's a pattern of toxic relationships. So sometimes we really do need help, because if you've had trauma, it can put a lot of blind spots in your life. It makes it more difficult at times to see reality. All right, next one. We've got to reestablish, maybe for the first time, healthy boundaries. And this oftentimes is very confusing and confused, but this is where I think professional intervention is really required, because, we can tell a person, no, don't do that, that's my boundary, and it can inflame the whole situation. So strategically building safety boundaries is something that generally we need to have help, not only to how to do it, but how to recognize when we need to do it. But there's a place that you develop a strong sense of self, and you're able to set a firm boundary and of what's acceptable and unacceptable, because you're solid in yourself. So there's times where you got to get that solidification of who I am, my self-worth, my value, and so you're literally able to stand up for yourself. All right. What are some of the steps that we can take towards healing? Well, I've hinted, I really do believe there's times where we need kind, knowledgeable, wise clinical intervention. Not every counselor is going to be the specialist in trauma, and not every trauma counselor can be helpful. We've got to come to a place of saying, look, I've suffered long enough. I do need help. And I need even help how to rebuild a new support system. I need help on how to recognize and build what is a healthy relationship. I need help rebuilding who I am, and I'm going to say who God designed you to be. I need help with understanding what is self-compassion. A lot of times we get into a mode, we're just beating ourselves up over and over and over, and beating ourselves up mentally, emotionally. Sometimes we'll even do self-injurious behavior, cutting on ourselves. We're just putting a lot of anger and rage back on ourselves. So, what is self-compassion? It's just having the same empathy that you would have for a friend who's going through a difficult time. There's times we need to have help rebuilding our physical well-being, how to even figure out, how am I going to change things nutritionally? How am I going to really take care of myself? How am I going to address my sleep that's maybe been so sporadic and difficult? So this again is where I need to get some clinical intervention. This is also why we do sleep studies. They're called sleep studies, but really it's examining what's going on in your sleep. That's why we do these here at the Center, Place of Hope, because if your sleep, because of trauma, is so poor, you're never going to feel good. And the depression, the anxiety, and the post-traumatic stress is always going to be there. So there are strategic interventions that a wise counselor and team can help a person with trauma. This is the number one issue that we see as far as people seeking help. I have depression or I have anxiety because of the repeated traumas in my life. We live in a culture right now where there seems to be a lot of traumatization. And my goal is, no, we don't want to be a victim. We got to step away from victimhood and move into more of, how can I move towards victory? That is really why I wrote the book, Triumph Over Trauma. Trauma is going to be there, but how do I triumph over that? So now, how to really know if I've got a trauma bond? There could be some real cycles of intense emotion. So you feel like, I'm just not able to manage my emotions. My emotions seem to take off, or I'm reactive, or I feel out of control emotionally. I may also suffer a deep sense of a fear of abandonment. I have to cling and be in a relationship. Otherwise, I don't feel in any way good about myself. And when I've had trauma, I'm looking for a reconnection, and I will at times choose a reconnection or a bond with somebody that I know is already unhealthy, but I do it out of a fear of abandonment. This is a big one. The other is just a dependency on a partner. That's another indication of a trauma bond. So as we look at this, remember, a trauma bond is a strong emotional connection that develops between an individual or individuals that have had intense, sometimes it's one-time event, but it's usually a very painful experience or experiences over time. And there is, I'm going to say it because of the last 40 years of our experience here at the Center, a Place of Hope, there is healing from trauma. Fear keeps us away from diving into what we need to do. And I gotta say, we need to look at the whole person approach. Yes, there's all the emotional issues. Yes, there's the history. Yes, there's the relationship patterns. I'm going to say physically I've been affected by trauma, how it's affected my body physically, and how I even take care of myself and my self-care. The other piece that I'm going to put in there is faith and the spiritual side of us. How do I address that, and what does that mean? That all needs to come together for a whole person approach to dealing with trauma. We are not to live as victims there, and we are to triumph over trauma. And we need to be willing to, what are my options? What do I need to do? And don't give up, even seeking help. You got to stay in the game to get the right kind of help. And one of the things I did with the Triumph Over Trauma book is I created a 12-week workbook to help a person begin that process. But you need to be, or a loved one needs to be working closely with wise counsel and skilled counsel. There is hope. Remember, hope comes when there's a plan, and a plan means that I have a strategy, and a strategy usually comes from working with somebody who's highly skilled in this area, who knows that the journey is worth it, and they're going to walk with you through that journey of healing.